So the other day, BC Premier David Eby made a pretty optimistic announcement regarding the future of forestry in the province that signaled good news for both old-growth forests and for the future of the industry, at least in the long run. See, for years since the government commissioned an old-growth strategic review, public outcry has been demanding what's been deemed a paradigm shift in the industry, or a re-envisioning of how we think about, value, and manage our forests. A focal point of this recent announcement is the removal of the unduly restrict clause from the Forest Practices Regulations, a clause which has historically restricted the ability for forests to be managed for biodiversity, endangered species, ecological function, or any other value in a way that would unduly reduce access to timber harvest in more than 5% of a working forest. So the removal of this clause opens up the legal ability for these forests to be managed for values beyond just timber, which is a huge step towards meeting our biodiversity and climate change mitigation targets. Currently, annual allowable cuts, or AACs, are determined in a similar manner, where a maximum of only 6% of a harvest area can be retained for values other than timber. That's 4% for things like soil, riparian areas, and visual quality, and only 2% for biodiversity. So this update here is one step closer to updating harvest planning practices that disproportionately favor maximized timber harvest over all other values. Yes, it is just language, but language is the framework in which we all understand and relate to the world around us, and this is a key step in creating this paradigm shift. Now, additionally, this announcement also confirmed increased funding to help transition mills to use smaller diameter second growth trees to create more value-added wood products and more jobs, which is great for the future of the industry and the communities that depend on it. He also announced increased support for Indigenous protected and conserved areas and the temporary deferral of an additional 200,000 hectares of old-growth forests just a few months before the first round of deferrals are set to expire. So in the long term, this all sounds great, but in the short term, this announcement did have its shortcomings. See, first off, it was pretty vague on a timeline as to when all this would be taking place, giving themselves until the end of the year to full enactment. So it doesn't actually affect any logging of irreplaceable old-growth forest ecosystems happening right now at this moment, or any planned in the near future. They also noted that 11,600 hectares of the previously identified most ecologically important, biodiverse, and at-risk old-growth forests left in BC had already been logged as discussions with First Nations were underway. And this announcement gave no specifics as to where these new additional deferrals are, or whether or not they're in areas immediately at risk of logging. Now, while these deferrals do not equate to protection, they do allow time to form long-term plans for them by the First Nations on whose land these forests reside. And while it isn't a ton of money relative to what's needed, this additional funding for IPCAs is a promising step that will help give these nations options as to how to manage and protect these forests well into the future. So all in all, it's a pretty awesome and inspiring announcement from the BC NDP that sets the stage for the many other hurdles we face in the next year to enact this paradigm shift, including developing and implementing alternatives to clear cutting. But it also highlights the urgency needed to ensure that the best, most biodiverse remaining old-growth forests don't continue to be cut down while First Nations and the province implement these positive changes. We've come a long way in the past few years to push for this industry reform, but it's not over yet. So let's continue to support each other in this transition to make sure it's just and equitable to us all. If you're able to, come out to the United for Old Growth rally in Victoria on Saturday, February 25th to show your support for making these changes and the creation of a better future for us all.